Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this technical talk on the updates to EI15 guide. I'd like to introduce Steve Sherwen of RPS, who's going to be looking after delivering this talk this morning. We're both at an event and our Wi-Fi's just died, so apologies if we do get a loss of connection. Yeah, we were both joining the meeting when the Wi-Fi at the event went down. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Steve. If you do have any questions for Steve during the presentation, if you can find the chat option at the top, pop them in there, and then I'll ask Steve the questions at the end. I'll also be watching out for anybody else joining in. I'll keep on that, Steve, if you want to. In fact, there's a couple of people just coming in now, so bear with us. Yep. So I'll hand over to you, Steve. I say if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and I'll ask Steve the questions at the end. And then we, hopefully you all enjoy the presentation. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Right. Okay. So, well, good afternoon, everybody. Now, thanks for taking the time out to listen to my presentation. It should take about half an hour. And if you've got any questions, as Dave said, pop them in the chat and we can look at those at the end. If you've got any serious, if I've said something completely controversial, or you want to say anything during the presentation, please do, and we'll try and resolve that as we go along. So first of all, start off with an introduction to myself. I'm Steve Sherwen. I work with Dave at RPS. I'm a principal safety consultant, and I specialise in fire and explosion issues, and principally sort of DESIR, area classification, and ignition source control. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, so don't be too mean on me presenting for an InstMC session. But as I often say to people, people often said to me, why mechanical engineers getting involved in DESIR and area classification? To which my reply is, it's the mechanical stuff that leaks. Okay. So what I'm going to cover today is basically give you a very high-level overview of the principal changes that have arisen with the introduction of the 5th edition of EI15. So I'll give you a bit of an introduction about what the EI15 is, where it comes from, what it can be used for. We'll have a very, very brief overview on why it's there, sort of what the legislation requires, what zones are. And then I'll get to the nitty-gritty and talk about what changes there are, what differences there will be on zone extents, and also some of the qualitative changes in the guidance that hopefully make it easier to interpret and easier to apply to end customer sites. So as we have to do on these things, I'll tell you a little bit about RPS. We're a risk management company. We get involved with most aspects of risk management. ATEX and DESIR, obviously, that's my area. Functional safety, hazard studies, Dave's area, and we do almost all the other aspects of risk management that you may need to address. And there's some of the customers that we deal with. Quite a wide spread of customers. We get involved in almost every industry sector, straight from food and drink through automotive, defence, nuclear, offshore oil and gas, and almost everything in between. So first of all, a few acknowledgements. I'm a member of the working group that put together EI15 and have been involved in the update from the 4th edition to the 5th edition. But it's a team effort. It takes a lot of people with a lot of different experiences, a lot of different expertise to provide the input. And the working group comprises a number of people, and there's a couple of people who have done a lot of go above and beyond. So Kieran Glynn is the chair of the group. He keeps us all together, and Laszlo works for the Energy Institute, and he's responsible for actually publishing and editing the document. So it was he who had the unenviable task of trying to keep 20 consultants and engineers on track to make sure that we hit. Well, we did hit a deadline. We missed quite a few, but it was his responsibility to try and marshal teams of people spending 2 hours discussing exactly what a clause should mean. And yes, we did have those discussions where it did take 2 hours to resolve a pair of words in a clause. I'm sure those of you who sit on standards committees are well used to those kind of discussions and wasted afternoons. So EI15. EI15 is a guidance document. It's not a British standard. It's not the law. But what it is it's a guidance document published by the Energy Institute for helping people to carry out area classification studies. It's written primarily by energy users for energy installations, but it has a lot of contribution for people outside of the traditional oil and gas field. And therefore, it is transferable for almost any installation where you can apply fluid categories, where you can identify direct examples. And I'll explain what they mean as we go a little bit further along. One of the key selling points of the I-15 is that it is recognised by the HSE as a valuable reference document for helping people comply with DESIR, and it's also referenced in the international standard 60079 Part 10 Part 1 is industry guidance. So there's lots of other industry guidances out there, but this one and a couple of others are referenced in the British standard as applicable industry guidance. And what that means is that you can feel confident in using this, that it's a well-researched, peer-reviewed, industry-accepted, good practice document for applying area classification to appropriate installations. So probably don't spend too long talking about DESIR to you guys, but as you probably know, DESIR is the Dangerous Substances in Explosive Atmospheres regulations, and it places an onus on employers to provide a safe place of work so that people are protected from the risk of fire and explosions and other energetic events. And Regulation 7 of DESIR explicitly says that you should be using guidance, and you should demarcate areas where there are significant amounts of flammables into zones. Okay, and as I previously said, EI15 is one of those guidances to help you do that. So if we were in a classroom, I would ask people to tell me what the zone definitions were, but as we're on online, I'll tell you what they are, but I appreciate that most of you are well aware of these. So the best zone, of course, is a non-hazardous area. A non-hazardous area is an area where a flammable atmosphere is so unlikely you don't need to take any special precautions at all. Okay, where we start getting interested is where we have a zone 2, and a zone 2 is where a flammable atmosphere formed by gas, mist or dust is there infrequently. It's basically happened because something's gone wrong. Okay, where you've got a zone 2, ignition sources need to be controlled. You can't have naked flames, you can't have hot surfaces, you can't have things sparking away. The next up the ladder is a zone 1, and a zone 1 is where you have a flammable atmosphere because you're doing something on purpose that releases a flammable atmosphere. Okay, so it's where you're opening pig traps, where you're taking samples, disconnecting hoses, all those scenarios where, as part of the design, as part of the normal operation of the system, you're creating a flammable atmosphere. You're allowing some material to mix with air. Where you've got the zone 1, ignition sources must be a bit more tightly controlled because it arises a bit more often. It's all a frequency and probability sort of game. The most arduous zone is a zone 0, and that, to all intents and purposes, is where you have a flammable atmosphere all the time. And I've written there that ignition sources must be excluded. Okay. Yes, ignition sources must be excluded. It doesn't mean that equipment needs to be excluded because, as you all know, you can engineer and design equipment so that it shouldn't produce an ignition source. Intrinsically safe equipment, very slow moving mechanical equipment, all those kind of things. And why do we do it? Well, as part of your DESIR assessment and with support from BS 1127. You have to do a DESIR assessment and identify ignition sources and how those ignition sources could be managed in a zone. So top of the tree, what most people think of DESIR is electrical equipment. So when you've got a zone, electrical equipment that goes into the zone needs to be appropriately certified and well managed. Mechanical equipment, for all its clankies, that now needs to be certified and managed in much the same way as electrical equipment does. But then we get into the sort of more operational things. So hot work, where you've got a zone, you need to manage hot work so that you're not producing spark, you haven't got naked flames there, and so that people know where the zones are, so that they know they can't take power tools in there, they can't just start carrying out hot work. If you've got a zone, you need to control electrostatic discharges. Even the tiny spark you get from a personal electric shock, if you manage to charge yourself up and you get a shock off touching a banister, that's far and away more energy than is needed to ignite even the most hard to ignite two-way gases. So methane, petrol vapor, all those kind of things can be ignited by the spark of a human body. So they need to be controlled. And lastly, barbecues. It's always a good idea to ensure that your barbecues are outside a hazardous area. And that's not a Photoshop, that is in fact a barbecue on an offshore installation in the North Sea. What you can't quite see from that photo is that the actual production area was a good 100 meters away across a bridge in the middle of a rather windy North Sea. So yes, it was it's perfectly safe to have a barbecue there. So let's get to what everyone's here for. What are the changes between the 4th and the 5th edition? Well, one of the main drivers in updating the 5th edition was that the Energy Institute and a lot of the users of the document recognized that the zone extents, the zone distances needed updating. They hadn't changed for quite a number of years. When the Energy Institute looked to see what the history, what the rationale behind some of the zone extents were, they were finding that they were either being calculated from, using computer models that were, well out of date now. FAST had moved on quite a number of editions. We also found that some of the zone extents themselves were, should we say, engineering judgment, to put it charitably, and so it was decided that we needed to renew those, and RPS were given the task of undertaking this. So a team of our consultants spent months going through all the various release scenarios, and this is essentially the findings. So this is what I'm going to do now, is just tell you where some of the zone extents have changed, so that if you're applying zones, you can be aware that some of the zones might have increased, some of them might have even decreased. Another big driver was the acceptance, or should I say, that the recognition that we're moving away from a hydrocarbon economy to a hydrogen economy. EI15 always had hydrogen in there, but quite a lot of people were getting confused because the hydrogen that was in the older editions of EI15 wasn't pure hydrogen. It was what they call refinery hydrogen. So it was a hydrogen up to about 80% proof, with then a lot of contaminants, which meant that you couldn't directly use zone extents for the old hydrogen, the old G2 class of liquid, for more for pure hydrogen. So we did some modeling to produce zone extents for both pure gaseous and liquid hydrogen. Okay. So when you're using the I-15, one of the first hurdles you have to overcome is to identify, can you use the document? Can your fluids that you're looking at fit one of these fluid categories? Okay, so as you can see from the table there are a number of fluid categories that EI15 recommend. When you've got liquids, it's fairly easy to identify a fluid category. So if you think of petroleum is a fluid category C because it's a flammable liquid handled at a temperature well above its flash point. Okay. What I was saying there about hydrogen, if you were using pure hydrogen in the edition 4, the fluid category stopped at G2. And pure hydrogen wasn't really a good fit for refinery hydrogen. So you can see now we've got some extra fluid categories so that we can use hydrogen. If you've got a gas like acetylene, you can't use EI15. That's almost like a hard stop because it doesn't fit any of those fluid categories. Okay, but it does cover, methane and most liquids. Propane, propane or LPG, should I say, is a fluid category A because that fits the category that if you have a release of that liquid, it'll flash off rapidly. So this is the old table. So for those of you who have not seen this before, for those of you who haven't used the I-15, to get a zone extent, you identify what your fluid category is. You identify, let me just get a pointer up. Okay, so you identify what your fluid category is, you identify your release pressure at where it's leaking out the hole, you identify what size hole you need to take, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how we choose that now, but needless to say, the kind of hole sizes we talk about in area classification are the 1 and 2 millimeters. Once you've got those 3 pieces of information, you can see how big your zone is. So if you've got a flange leaking LPG at 10 bar through a 1 mil hole, you have a zone 2 of 2.5 meters. Okay. Some other tables are in the I-15. We have vents. So if you've got process vents, either venting off gases or venting off low flash point liquids. To determine what the zone is around those vents, we have the vent diameter, the vent rate, i.e. how much vapor is being expelled from that vent, and that gives us the zone extent. Okay. Oh, sorry, the previous one, that's for category C liquids, so off tank breathers, those kind of things, and these are for gases off process vents. Okay, and the last table we'll look at before we got to highlight the changes were spills, or should I say pools. So you could look to see what fluid category you had, how big your pool was, and then the table would tell you how far from the edge of that pool you were to the zone extent around that pool, that spill, or that bunded area, or that sump. Okay, so what does the modelling tell us? What are the findings? Well, the first one, as I said, was that we've now we've included pure hydrogen and also liquid hydrogen. So we went out to industry, found out what sort of pressures they thought they would need the extents model to, and because the future hydrogen economy is going to be storing hydrogen at some pretty ridiculous pressures, we've modeled those up to 400 and 1,000 bar. Liquid hydrogen only required to be modeled up to 13.3. And before somebody asks the question, why 13.3, I honestly can't remember. So this is quite an important table because it shows if you've been using G2 as hydrogen to determine hydrogen extents, how much the difference is, or the differences between the zones. So if we look at, say, if we take a 10 bar release of hydrogen, if you used EI15 edition 4, you would use, if you've taken a G2 distance, that was 0.5 meter. For pure hydrogen, it's now 1 meter, and that's a difference of 0.5 meters. Not a huge amount, but it might affect some zones. If you go to a bigger hole size and a bigger pressure, you can see how those zone extents for pure hydrogen are quite a bit bigger than for G2. So if you've got a client, or if you've done some work where you know that hydrogen has been modeled as G2, then it's definitely worth going back and having a look to see what the impact of applying the correct fluid category is, because you can see it's quite marked. Okay, the differences between the fluid category are less so, because obviously we're talking about the same substance. We haven't got a change of substance like we did before, and you can see that for the typical hole sizes we use for area classification, we're not talking about huge differences, certainly not for 1 millimeter. For 2 millimeter, as you get to the higher pressures, there's a bit of difference. But LPG tanks that we use domestically are around a sort of, we take 1 mil holes at these sort of low pressures, and you can see that, you know, we're not talking about much difference. In fact, the zone has actually decreased in size there. Okay, a question that you might be asking is, well, why at some hole size does the zone increased, while at some other hole size or pressures the size has decreased? It's all to do with just the application of the more modern version of FAST. All the maths, the modeling in the more up-to-date version is just a bit more accurate, and that you can have more confidence that these change in zone extents are accurate. Okay. So I've just missed fluid category B there. Fluid category B is a funny one. Fluid category B is a liquid that's held at that's released at a temperature not only above flash point but above its boiling point. So it tends to be when you've got elevated temperatures. You don't, of all the times I use EI15, this is probably the fluid category that you get to use least. But you can see again that it follows a similar pattern, that for the 1 mil holes, very little difference. For the 2 mil holes on the higher pressures, there's a bit more difference. Okay, probably the fluid category that gets used most is fluid category C, which is a release of liquid above its flash point. So you can see it covers a multitude of sins. It covers petroleum, most solvents, methanol, ethanol, IPA, all those kind of things. Because it covers such a wide range of substances, right the way through from, you know, petrol with a flash point of -40 to diesel with a flash point of +50, we had to choose a representative substance. So hexane was chosen. Hexane gives very conservative answers. because it's the most volatile, one of the most volatiles of the category Cs. It's quite analogous to petrol, really. Okay, so what you can say is that when you get zone extents for category C liquids, they are sort of conservative. They are going to be a worst case. Okay, and again, this follow the findings that we pulled out from the modelling follow a similar pattern that we've seen before. Slight changes for the small hole sizes, slightly bigger zone extents for the bigger holes. Okay. What we would advise people to do, if you are, if you are concerned that some of these numbers are overly conservative for your scenarios, the report that will be accompanying EI15 goes into a lot of detail about the calculation and the sensitivities of the modelling. So you can interrogate that report to find out if your specific scenario can be remodelled. If you want to do the modelling yourself to come up with a specific set of figures for your scenario. But we think that for almost all situations, particularly at these lower pressures at smaller hole sizes, for storage tanks, pumps, things like that, we're not, you'd be going to a lot of effort to maybe save half a metre or a metre of zoning, which in the grand scheme of things probably wouldn't be worth the effort of going to all that work in remodelling releases. Okay. Fluid category G1 is natural gas. Or should I say the correct term is a methane-rich gas, but it's natural gas. And as you can see here, we've got some very similar figures to what was in the 4th edition. What was decided, though, was to get rid of which I think a lot of people's opinion was the slightly confusing less than a metre. What is less than a metre? Is it 1 centimetre? Is it 99 centimetres? Both of those figures are less than a metre, but they both have quite a different they are quantitatively quite different. So we decided to, instead of having this less than a metre, to put half a metre, because that's the modelling that came out. So you can see here that if you were being pessimistic and comparing a metre to half a metre, the zones have changed quite a bit. Well, changed a little bit. Okay. I'll preempt a question that may come up later. How do these figures relate compare to SR25? Well, you need to think about the SR25 has smaller zones for natural gas, but you've got to compare eggs with eggs. The hole size that SR25 use are much smaller than EI15, because SR25 is industry guidance for basically end users of natural gas. So if you've got boiler houses or furnaces, etc., you're an end user of natural gas and you should be using SR25. EI15 is more for the producers and the processors of natural gas, hence the larger hole sizes and the fact that we don't have zone 2 NEs at these lower pressures. Okay, how am I doing for time? Not too bad. We get similar sort of figures for the vents. So category C vents, again, you can see that if you've got a storage tank that's venting away with, storage tank with methanol in or something, we're not talking lots of different numbers. Okay. So as you can see, process vents, again, the same sort of ballparks, nothing too dramatically different. So I think you can sort of see that if you've got a chemical plant or a process handling the lower pressures that you can justify the lower hole sizes for, there isn't a huge change between edition 4 and edition 5, and going out and having to change things dramatically, it probably isn't required. If you've got the higher pressures, if you've certainly got hydrogen, then you might want to go back and double check what's been done in the past to see if the zones that are there are still realistic, are still relevant. One last thing, I'll just go back a couple of things. The observer amongst you might have noticed that the pressures for natural gas, they used to top out at 100 bar. We've now modelled those up to 300 bar, purely because a lot of offshore installations have those higher pressure natural gas streams. So we increased the range of the table. Okay. One last thing we'll look at before we start looking at the more qualitative changes is pools. So edition 4, you saw the table for pools had quite a lot of different geometries of pools, and it also had category A, B, and C. So the first change, let me just go to the table. The first change you'll see No, I won't go to the tables. The big change you'll see is that we no longer include pools of category A liquid in EI15. Okay, the reason for that is that when we've looked to see how those pools had been modelled previously, they'd been modelled from refrigerated releases. So if you had a refrigerated release of -40 propane that was released, obviously that needs to boil off before it disperses, and you do get a pool of liquid. We consulted with Liquid Gas UK, and they said that almost all LPG storage now is pressurized rather than refrigerated. So pressurized storage of LPG, if it's released from a hole that we use in the typical hole size that we use in area classifications, such as 1 mil or 2 mil, you end up with the material just flashing off straight away. You don't get a pool. So the decision was made to not include pools of category A liquid or LPG. The other big change was that because of the way that FAST models pool releases, we decided, the Energy Institute said, let's choose one pool depth. So rather than having 2 or 3 different depths of pool, a representative 0.1 meter was chosen. Okay, so we still have the different radii of pools, or the different diameters, but only one depth now. The changes that comes out with, as you can see, for category B liquids. So category B, and remember, is a liquid that's above flash point, but also above boiling point. You can see that when we get for smaller pools, there's not a huge difference. Well, there's no difference. But once we get to the bigger pool diameters, there's quite a big reduction in the zones. Okay, so instead of 15 meters for a 3 meter pool, we're down to 6.5. And there's a similar story for category C. So a slight change in the 1 meter pools down to 2 meters, but quite a big difference, certainly when we get to 10 meter pools. Instead of having a 24 meter zone around a pool, we're now down to 13 meters. And that's just because the evaporation rate that FAST was modeling using the more up-to-date software was markedly different. I think it was about 3 times less than had been modeled previously. Okay. Last thing to say about the modelling is that the team of modellers that did the work, and I think I did spot one of the names online, so I hope you're happy with seeing the fruits of your labour. Lots and lots of models were done. I think 100,000 cases were run, and if you're a data guru or a data freak, there will be a report detailing all this sensitivity studies released. I think it's up to about 600 pages. So it'll detail all the modelling that was done and also highlight the various extra studies that were done to find out, what the sensitive parameters were. Okay, but that's not really something that I'm an expert on, so I shall leave that there. Okay, some more general updates, so some qualitative updates. So the first one is that the working group decided to put in an interval of how often area classification should be reviewed. The reason for this is that it's a question we get asked a lot. So how often should we review our classification? How often should we redo our zoning studies? Well, obviously you should redo your area classification whenever anything changes. So if you've got a new process, if you've got a change in material, if you've got changes in pressures in the process, then you should review your classification. But if you've got a fairly stable process, one that hasn't maybe noticeably changed in 5 years, we recommend an interval of 5 years. And the reason that interval was chosen was it ties in with offshore safety case reviews and coma safety reports, and it's an interval that the HSC seem to like for those big studies. And of course, if you're going to be doing your redoing your coma safety report, you review your HAZOPs, your PHAs. So why not have a glance over your HAC to make sure it's still accurate? Okay. Sample points. The guidance around sample points has changed a bit over the last few years, or the last couple of editions of EI15, should I say. Decision was made this time just to take out a lot of the judgment calls and the complexity in it, and just to state some pragmatic guidance that if you've got a sample point where you're taking an open sample, let's call it a zone 1 with 1 meter around it. Previous versions of EI15 had you calculating hole sizes, calculating release rates. what we found from experience is that when you accompany people taking samples, particularly in the offshore scenario where the samples tend to be a bit more volatile or at higher pressures, the guys taking the samples often wear LEL detectors. Okay, and even when they're taking samples of quite volatile crude oils or condensates, they're taking a sample into an open jar, and that you know, half a meter away from the LFL detector, and that LFL detector never goes off. Okay, so it's saying that a pragmatic solution to say, let's just call sample points a zone 1 around it, and then the secondary releases that can arise from a sample point, let's try and eliminate those or reduce them through technical measures, double valving, dead man's handles, plugging off the sample point when not in use, those kind of things. Ventilation hasn't changed much. That was one of the big changes in edition 4. For those of you with longer memories, you might remember edition 3 of EI15 had the very arbitrary 12 air change an hour. Nobody really knows where that came from. It worked well for small little enclosures, not quite so well for huge turbine halls. So that was changed in the 2015 and still remains the same. The tables in for calculating the ventilation rates have changed those slightly, just to take into account the fact that the modelling and the release rates for the fluids leaking into those enclosures changed as a result of being remodelled. So some of the ventilation rates may have changed, but those changes weren't significant. Okay. Those of you using the EI15, remember there was a clause in it that said that a frequently used valve should have a 0.3 metre zone 1 around the stem, but never really, you know, words like frequently used or bigger than or smaller than are all very wishy-washy and open to a lot of interpretation. So that was tightened up in this edition. The basically says that what we mean by a frequently used valve is a rising stem control valve. Okay, it's not an isolation valve that's opened or closed once a week or even once a day. It's a valve that's constantly cycling. Okay, so if you've got a pressure control valve, a level control valve, or a flow control valve that's always moving to maintain a set point, that's what we mean by a frequently opened or a frequently operated valve. Okay, the packing in that valve becomes pretty similar to the packing you get on a reciprocating pump or a compressor. Okay. We also toughen up, have better language around pipework and vessel internals to say that, you know, if you've got a pressurized system, the internals are non-hazardous because they're full of fuel. You haven't got any oxygen in there, and some wording has been introduced talking about the reliability and the applicability of inerting systems in the chemicals industry. As you probably know, a lot of basis of safety is the inerting of vessels. So we talk about how that can be incorporated to lower your zoning dependent on the reliability of those systems. Okay, and everyone's favorite disease topic, diesel. It always amazes me whenever I do these talks. It was the same for the 4th edition when it came out. There's lots of changes, lots of technical innovation, lots of clever stuff goes on, but all everyone wants to talk about is diesel and mists. Well, in the gap between the 4th and the 5th edition, as you probably know, the HSL and the HSE have done a lot of work on modelling misted releases of diesel and Jet A1 and other high flashpoint liquids. To the upshot being that they've demonstrated that yes, you can get a flammable release if you get the right hole shape and size and the correct pressure that drives the liquid out. What was decided in EI15 was to say that if you've got complex high pressure systems handling things like diesel and Jet A1, then yes, you should, you may require zoning around them. So if you're in a refinery handling diesel at, 10 or 15 bar, pumping it around in massive ring mains, then it may be pragmatic to put zones around it. But 99% of the diesel installations in the UK, well, almost anywhere in the world, aren't high pressure complex systems. They're gravity fed systems, they're road tanker loading, filling up vehicles, it's emergency generators, it's fire water pumps. And we still say that, EI15 still says that a disease risk assessment is required around those installations because diesel comes under the remit of DESIR. However, for a lot of those installations where you're at low pressure, commercial, well-maintained proprietary systems, zoning shouldn't be required. Okay, so hopefully that helps a lot of people in the industry to say that, right, I've got a simple diesel system, I've got a tank that I'm using to fuel forklift trucks. It's all done under gravity or very low pressure. I need to put some safety measures in place, but I don't need to go to the trouble expense of installing certified equipment, which offers very little benefit. Okay. And the last thing to mention, a lot of people like the direct examples in the back of the i15. Direct examples are where you've got a common, or I should say, a frequently used system like storage tanks or road tanker loading, and they have zones applied to them. You don't need to go through the task of trying to work out a hole size or a driving pressure. You just say, right, I've got an atmospheric storage tank. It looks like that. Therefore, I can apply these zones. So these hadn't been reviewed for about 15 years. So they had a good work over this edition of the guidance, with input from lots of industry experts such as Flowgas, Tank Storage Association, and BP, and all these direct examples have been updated. They're a lot easier to use. We've got better pictures in them. And also that some of the detail that was hidden in text is now a bit more obvious and a bit more well presented in tables. Okay, so you can extract the pertinent information, and you can use these direct examples a lot more easily. Okay, so obviously the guidance has been updated. There's some changes. I wouldn't have said there's massively significant changes, but there are changes in there. It's probably significant if you've used the wrong classification for hydrogen. But apart from that, it's more an evolution than a revolution. Do you need to reclassify? Well, as the guidance now says, if you haven't looked over your system in 5 years, it might be a good opportunity to do so with this new guidance that's come out. But if you've got zones that have been determined from edition 4 of the i15, you're probably not unsafe, but you might be able to find that you can refine some of the zones by using the 5th edition. And it doesn't take me to tell you if you can make some zones smaller. One, you're following the hierarchy of control in Desir, but also there could be economic and cost saving benefits because you might not have to install so much certified equipment. Okay, so yes, it's good practice to keep reviewing, and as we said earlier on, if you haven't reviewed your hack for 5 years, now is probably a good time to do so. Okay, so just to close out before I hand back over to Dave, as you all know, having an area classification is a legal requirement under Desir, and we feel, well, so I say we, the Energy Institute feel that this version is, if you've got hydrocarbon systems, is a good document to use, and the change from the 4th edition to the 5th edition keeps this document relevant, especially with the introduction of hydrogen as a fluid category. And the aim is that the resulting document is more accurate, pragmatic, easy to use, and can be used for many of the chemical, oil and gas and other installations in the UK and across Europe and the world. Okay. Right, I don't know if anyone's got any questions. I will. Are you going to be my moderator, Dave? Is there anything in the chat?
Yeah. So at the moment, there's nothing in the chat. So while people gather their thoughts, apologies for the background noise. Everyone's coming for lunch. Just a few things from the Institute. Thanks very much, Steve, for doing that presentation. Very interesting, certainly for myself, and dipping in and out of Desir. But yeah, thank you for doing that. But yeah, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. A few Institute things. So locally in the section, we've recently had our awards night, which was very well attended. At the awards night, we launched our Early Career Engineer Award for 2025. This year, Ben Thompson of United Utilities won the award on his innovation on phosphate management within water systems. So that was a very good one. But we're looking for people to apply for next year. And we also, on the 1st of November, launched Apprentice of the Year, brand new award for 2025. So if you go to the website, InstMC.org, and look for the local section, Central Northwest, the details are there of how to get the information on that one. So we have got a question now, Steve.